From Evil Seeds, a Turok novella by Fabian Nicieza. This story takes place after the death of Primar Gen and was released on the official Turok website from December 16, 1998 to April 1, 1999. Chapter 3, Making Parking Lots. Surviving nuclear bombardment isn't as difficult as it sounds when you also happen to be Joshua Fireseed, college student, and Turok, the techno-magic Sequin protector of the gateways between Earth and an interdimensional sewer called the Lost Land. As the barrage rained down from the array of fusion cannons aimed by a mysterious alien race at Josh and his best friend, Barry Hackowitz, Turok did what his kind had been doing for thousands of years: saved his ass. A reflexive flip of the black lens over his left eye allowed Josh to look through the folding eye. In the suddenly negative space view the lens gave him, Josh saw several white pinpricks of floating energy, like thistledown trapped in amber. With the speed of thought, he opened one of the ethereal doorways, creating a warp fissure in the space around the gateway. Turok shoved Barry with a frantic heave and dove into the fissure immediately after him. The rip in mid-air closed just as the initial wall of fusion fire engulfed the spot where they had just been standing. They floated in the netherscape, a Dr. Seuss meets Albert Einstein place between here and everywhere, now and everywhen. It was the thin line which separated the real universe, home to Barry and Josh, and the lost land of Galliana. From this location, Turok could access a doorway to any point in time on Earth, or open a gateway right back to the lost land, which existed in null time and void space. Joshua reached into his mystical satchel, the light burden, removing various weapons from the seemingly empty leather sack. Tech bow? Check. Plasma launchers? Check. Warblade? Nah, no time for in-your-face fun. Phase pulse hand blaster? Check. Barry stared in disbelief as his friend removed one killing weapon after another from the bowels of the infinite bag. It was an NRA member's dream. He hated to see his friend so easily slide into combat mode. He preferred the light-hearted, adventurous, romantic scoundrel he knew Joshua to be. But the longer his roommate had served as Turok, the more willing he had become to meet force with force. Granted, certain occasions warranted retaliatory violence, but Barry preferred a more diplomatic and, quite honestly, safer approach. Never occurred to you to maybe, I don't know, talk to them? Asked Barry. Josh slid the metallic chambers of the various rifles slung over his shoulders into place, priming the weaponry for immediate use. Yeah, he replied. I plan to talk to them. I've just been finding out that people on the receiving end of a superior weapon are more likely to sit down and chat than those who think they have the advantage in firepower. How very Dr. Strangelove of you, his friend muttered, knowing the reference would be lost on Josh. Josh collapsed the tech bow, a 6-foot-long gleaming metallic bow which fired an assortment of energy-based arrows into a harness which hooked onto his back right hip. Barry knew from experience that Josh could have the bow opened and notched within seconds. Listen, Josh said, it's not like they gave us a chance to talk things out, right? Whoever they are, for whatever reason, they don't want to see us accomplish our mission. That's illogical, said Barry, as he floated upside down and felt his nose run onto his forehead. We placed a cybernetic stabilizer into the Barakian newborn as a way of using that sentient alien landmass collective to channel the tectonic energies of Galliana's ley lines and basically save all of the lost land from tearing apart like a jigsaw puzzle. Sure, and by the time you would have explained all that to them, scoffed Josh, we would have been dead 6 times over. The two friends looked at each other in silence. A flare of white light ripped in the null space like a fuse being lit and running straight up in the air. Josh had accessed a gateway to take him back. You're staying here until I think it's safe to bring you back, he said. Pretending for 1 minute that I would even want to argue with that strategy, said Barry. You think I'd have a shot at changing your mind? We were face down by at least a dozen fusion cannons fired by an obviously violent unknown alien race intent on killing us, replied Josh. What do you think? Barry slapped his friend on the back and said, "You go and have yourself a party, okay?" Josh laughed as he stepped through the rip in time and space. "Just be back by midnight, you hear?" He heard Barry's voice call out in a muffled echo as his body slid back into reality, or as real as the Lost Land could be. Josh looked around. He had calculated correctly. He was in a hiding place at the far end of the collective Barakian landmass. The ground actually felt warm, which wasn't surprising, since the small mountain he crouched on was actually a group of living creatures burrowed into each other to form an interlocking group hive. From his vantage point, he could see the alien opposition below him and to the north. They held several members of the Forever Light scientific survey team hostage. Josh saw no sign of his friend and guide, Aiden, the speaker of Forever Light. The aliens might have simply destroyed her bioelectric form or downloaded it into a mechanical cage of some sort. He tried not to think too much about the various possibilities. Hard enough he was starting to fall in love with a woman who, technically, wasn't really alive. Harder still that she was so often actively involved in his very dangerous missions. Josh had never seen this alien race. They might be new additions to Galliana, the piecemeal landscape that often added or lost entire civilizations or land masses on the whim of the temporal storm which swept inexorably through the real universe. If they were rookies, that might explain their rash actions against Josh and Barry. The city of Forever Light was the only haven in the Lost Land, a huge, sprawling city made up of countless alien races, cultures, habitats, landscapes, atmospheres, and even physics. To go against them meant that you disagreed with their belief in peaceful coexistence between the myriad alien races of Galliana, or you simply didn't know any better. Josh hoped for the latter, because the former meant his opposition were borderline nutbags. He sucked in a few quick breaths, preparing him for what he had to do. Josh stood up, arms raised in the air, and shouted down, "I am Turok, and sworn to protect the people of the Lost Land. I am not your enemy." A rapid barrage of plasma pulse blasts, which detonated all around him, cut off his words. By the time the Barakian flesh was gouged in the firefight, Joshua had already slipped into a gateway, only to emerge instantaneously behind the aliens who continued to fire. This time, Joshua decided talk was cheap. He held the phase pulse hand blaster in his right hand. The sleek metal felt warm over his closed fist. The device was an oversized U-shape, with one arm being 3 times the thickness of the other. The thin side rested in his palm, tucked under his grip, while the thicker firing side looked like a pair of brass knuckles designed by the Marquis de Sade. With his thumb poised over the trigger toggle, Josh pointed his fist and depressed the firing switch. 17 plasma tracers pulsed out of the gun with a heartbeat rhythmic pace. The gun's navigational computer had already locked onto the closest living targets and maneuvered each glowing tracer bullet towards one of the aliens. 17 aliens went down in a flash of energy. Josh had set the tracer bullets at a medium setting, preferring not to kill anyone if he could avoid it. Their reaction would gauge whether he needed to increase the harshness of his response. The aliens stayed down. Half strength apparently would be enough. The remaining aliens turned in dismay at the counterattack, moving into new positions and trying to avoid the continued assault from Josh's gun. Turok ducked behind a tangled rise of Barakian flesh, leaving the hand blaster nestled into a crevice at his feet. His fingers deftly ran over the computer pad on the gun's handle, and he quickly moved further away from the charging alien horde. Josh removed his tech bow with a flick of his wrist, letting its swivel joints fan outward and lock into place. 3 glowing energy arrows came to life between Josh's fingertips, and he notched them on the thin energy wire that constituted the bow's string. The alien platoon reached the hiding place of the hand blaster. Josh opened up a rift with the folding eye and slid his free hand into the glowing tear up to his wrist, only to terrify the aliens who leaned over the hand blaster when his hand appeared in mid-air and punched down the firing toggle. The gun fired tracer blasts point blank into the faces of the soldiers who surrounded it. They all fell back in agonized screams of pain. Many of their guns went off in the spasm of their trigger fingers. Fusion blasts blew chunks out of the hillside. One soldier's entire body exploded violently, his grenade belt accidentally detonating. Suddenly, an unexpected rumble seized the hillside with an epileptic burp. Josh was tossed off his feet and he tumbled 20 meters down the Barakian's side. Dusting himself off, Josh suppressed a smile. He firmly believed in bringing a little bit of the Three Stooges into any combat situation, but he was confronted with real pain here, both that which he was inflicting on others and that which they wished to inflict on him. He turned to fire the arrows at the closest targets, expecting that his little fall would have given them a momentary advantage, but was surprised to see the battlefield was suddenly empty. Smoke wafted through the air, carried by the crosswinds that perpetually blew across the lost land. The aliens were gone. The survey team from Forever Light was gone. How? Another tremor shook Turok off his feet. The multiple suns that hung in the Gallianan sky like hot coals in a pair of tight speedos were suddenly blocked by a massive rise of grey earth. A shadow was cast over Josh as if a building had suddenly been erected in front of his face, because one had. The Barakian collective landmass had risen in protest to the fighting which had been waged on its body, and in his mind, Joshua heard them. It talk, and it only said one word: die. End of chapter. From Evil Seeds, a Turok novella by Fabian Nicieza.